Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the skeletal system for today. So there's a lot to cover when it comes to the skeletal system, but in this video we're going to go over the functions of the skeletal system and also the classification of bones, so the different types of bones that we find throughout the body. And in making this video, we used an open education resource, so it's a free textbook on anatomy and physiology, and we're going to use the chapter on bone tissue and the skeletal system to help support the content of this video. So the first thing that we want to talk about again is the function of the skeletal system as a whole. As listed on the textbook, the 5 critical functions um, of the skeletal system is to support the body, facilitate movement, protect internal organs, produces blood cells, and stores and releases minerals and fats. So we're going to go over each one more specifically. So beginning with the first one, supports the body. Now, when you think about our skeletal system, right, if we didn't have a skeletal system, we would just be a limp mass of organs, muscles, and skin. But because we have a skeletal system, it provides that structure and support for the rest of the body, to give us that, to give us that size and shape of what we look like as humans. The second critical function here is to facilitate movement. Now, the key word here is facilitate movement. Um, so when you think about movement, you might think about muscles, and you're not wrong if you thought that, because muscles are responsible for producing movement. But muscles need to attach to something, right? And that something are our bones of the skeletal system. So bones act as points of attachment for our muscles in order to facilitate, so in order to help movement occur. You might have heard of the term musculoskeletal system. So this is a combination of our skeletal and our muscular system and how they interact in order to produce movement. So very important. So the third one here is that it protects internal organs. Now, a great example of this is our rib cage, right? Our rib cage is a part of our skeletal system, and what it protects is our lungs and our heart, right? Another example is our skull. Our skull is also part of the skeletal system, and it protects the brain, so it protects the internal organs. The fourth one here is that it produces blood cells. Now, when you think about a bone, there's the exterior portion, which we typically see if we were going to look at it, if we looked at a bone, and then there's the interior portion, so the portion that we can only see if we cut a bone open. Now, the interior portion of the bone is called the bone marrow, which you probably heard of before. Then there are 2 types of bone marrow. There's yellow marrow and red marrow. So yellow marrow is responsible for adipose, or it contains adipose tissue or fat tissue. Um, so it stores fat tissue, but it can also serve as a source of energy if the body needs it. The red marrow, however, is responsible for the production of blood cells, such as red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So that's responsible for the production of blood cells, which brings us to our 5th critical function of the skeletal system. We've already talked about the storage and release of fats, but we didn't talk about minerals. So when you think about bones, right, you often associate it with calcium. So calcium is a mineral that's necessary for a lot of the functioning that occurs in the body, and bones contain a lot of calcium. So it stores a lot of calcium, but it can also release the calcium into the bloodstream in order for us to maintain a level that really supports physiological processing. So that's why it's responsible for storing and releasing minerals as well. So those are the 5 critical functions of the skeletal system that was mentioned in the textbook. The next thing that we're going to talk about are the different types of bones that we find in the body. Now, there are over, I believe, 206 bones all throughout. We have a total of 206 bones in the body. But there are 5 major classifications, right? Meaning that we can categorize all those 206 bones in the body, as one of these 5 major classifications. Now, the 5 major classifications are flat bones, irregular bones, long bones, short bones, and sesamoid bones. Now, the best way to really understand the difference between all these different types of classifications um, is knowing where they are in the body. So more specifically, what bones are specifically considered long bones, what bones are specifically considered short bones, and also the features of them, and pretty much the name, right? The name really gives away what kind of bone it is, right? For example, short bone or a long bone or a flat bone. Just the name itself tells you what kind of what the bone should generally look like. But in the textbook, they also have a table called Bone Classifications, Table 6.1, that really explains what each of the 5 classifications are, the function, and also an example of a specific bone that would be under that classification. So we're gonna go over this table real quick. So beginning with long bone, right? Long bones are more cylinder-like shape, and they're longer more than they are wide, and the function is for leverage. So an example of a long bone is our femur, which is our thigh bone, or our humerus, which is our long arm bone. So these are very long bones, right? They're cylinder-like shape, and they're longer more than they are wide. But what's interesting here is that our metatarsals and our metacarpals, right? Metatarsals and metacarpals are the bones of your hand and feet. Metacarpals are the long bones of your hand, and metatarsals are the long bones of your foot. Now, you might think, why are they considered long bones if they're not as long as a femur, right? Your thigh bone, or they're not as long as your humerus. But remember, think about the features here. It's cylinder-like and it's longer more than it is wide. So it doesn't matter, if we're thinking about a very, very long bone, in length, or a short one in length, but it has the same features as a femur or a humerus. So the next one here are short bones. So short bones, they're more cube-like, right? They're more cube-like. So they're more equal in length, width, and thickness, and the function of that is to provide stability, support, while allowing for some motion. An example of our short bones are our carpals and tarsals. So your carpals are the bones of your wrist, and your tarsals are the bones of your ankle. So your wrist bones, they're very short. They're considered short bones because they're more equal in length, width, and thickness. Now, a really great example here is in the picture on the bottom right. The bottom right of this picture it says short bones. So what you're looking at are the bones of the ankle, and if you notice where they have the black lines pointed at, they're very cube-like, right? Compared to what's below it, which is considered our metatarsals. So these long lines here, I'm not sure if I can draw. No, but the bones that are right below those short bones are longer, right? And that would be considered the long bones, so the metatarsals. So going back to our table here, the next one are flat bones. So flat bones, as you can imagine from the name itself, they're flatter, they're thinner, and they're more curved. So the function of those types of bones are they're points of attachment for muscles and also protectors of internal organs. So protector of internal organs. So just like our example earlier with the ribs and the skull, right? Our ribs are considered flat bone. They're considered flat bones, and also our cranial bones. So the bones that make up the skull are also considered flat bones. And in the image here, the example of the flat bone they give us, a flat bone they give us is our sternum, so our chest, the bones of our chest, right? And going over here on the 4th classification, irregular bones. So they're more irregular in shape, right? They're complex in shape. There's really no set way of how they look, and they look very different compared to the other kinds of bones that we have in the body. And again, they protect internal organs, And a really great example of irregular bones is our um, vertebral are the bones of our vertebral column. So the bones of your spine, such as your thoracic bones, your cervical bones, your lumbar bones. All these bones are irregular, and a really great example again is looking at this image on the top right. We have an example of one of the bones in our vertebral column, which we'll go more in depth in our future videos. And the second one they have here is facial bones. So earlier we were talking about cranial bones. So cranial bones are more of the bones. They're the bones that make up, the rest of your head. Think about the top of your head, the back of your head. Those are all really cranial bones, or the side of your head. Those are all cranial bones. Your facial bones are more of the bones that make up the front of your face, right? Um, and that's the difference between the facial bones and the cranial bones of the skull. And again, we're going to go more in depth with it with our future video. And finally, the last classification here that we have is the sesamoid bone. So it's a small and round, and it's embedded in tendons, so it's deep within tendons, right? It protects tendons from compressive forces. And really, the only example of a sesamoid bone in our body is our kneecap. So again, those are the 5 major classification of bones, right? All the bones in our body can be classified under any one of these classifications. Um, and it's important for us to be able to classify bones like this, because then we understand, what are the similarities and differences between the different kinds of bones that make up our body. So I hope that clarifies the function and also the different types of bones that we find in the body. In our future videos, we're going to go more in depth with the more specifics of the skeletal system, like different types of the appendicular system or the axial skeletal system, and also how bone is formed, which is a very, very complex process, but it's not too difficult. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.